Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Best Picture Must Be Doing Something Right podcast. I'm very excited to get this started. I'm here with Jamie.
Hello.
And my name is Joseph. I'll be hosting the show and hopefully all the shows going forward as well. Basically, the concept of the show is this. This will be a series that will be available on Spotify. That's probably how you listen to this, or any other sort of audio platform. The concept of the show is simple. If it was nominated for Best Picture, we will talk about it, and that's at the Academy Awards. So the reason I've set it as that is so you know that going in, there's some kind of quality behind the film, but also it's a
Well,
yeah, you hope so. No, but then again, that's the whole point. Sort of like that's why the title comes into place. It must be doing something right. It must appeal to someone.
do we get to review Crash?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Shakespeare
we
in
might do it
Love.
at a later date. Yeah, yeah, but it's not even just the Best Picture winners, sort of like the Best Picture nominees as well. Today we are going to be reviewing a famous Best Picture nominee, a famous loser of Best Picture that hasn't aged well as a decision from the Academy. If you're wondering about the name, yes, it is a reference to the Lonely Island's pop star Never Stop, Never Stopping. Go and listen to the song I'm a Weirdo if you don't understand the reference to that. Basically, there's a line that says, "I'm crazy for Driving for Miss Daisy. Best Picture must be doing something
Okay.
right." So, because Driving Miss Daisy is widely considered one of the worst films to win Best Picture, and I have it on DVD, which I'm looking at right
Really?
now.
All right. Yeah. Not a signed copy
So
there.
we might review that at a
Antique.
later date. Yeah, exactly. I know I've had it for years. It was at a stage where I wanted to collect all the Best Picture winners, but then it just
And on
didn't
a
last very
related
long
note,
because
the competition
yeah,
for this episode.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Who wants this copy of Driving Miss Daisy? I have a copy of How Green Is Your Valley as well, which is famously the film that beat Citizen Kane.
Oh,
I've got that up on the top shelf there. Honestly, I
still
haven't
wanted
watched
to
the
watch
DVD in
it.
years. Yeah, I haven't even watched it
Oh,
yet.
no.
I don't watch DVDs anymore. The last DVD I watched was my copy of Almost Famous, which I watched for the last episode of the film show.
Oh, yeah.
That was generally
Isaac's favourite film.
last DVD I watched. But that was the DVD I bought ages ago.
And Joseph, what was my
Ages ago,
favourite
and I've
film
watched
for
it.
that? It was
Zodiac,
Zodiac.
which was a film directed by today's director in the spotlight, David Fincher. This film is widely considered his best ever film. It is 2010's The Social Network, directed by David Fincher, written by Aaron Sorkin, based on the book Accidental Billionaires by Ben Mesrick, and stars Jesse Eisenberg, Andrew Garfield, and Justin Timberlake. If you don't know about the film and want to know what the plot is, it is if you've been living under a rock, that is, I think. If you haven't seen this by now, come on, sort it out. It's a classic. The plot of the film is as Harvard student Mark Zuckerberg, familiar name, isn't it, creates the social networking site that will become known as Facebook. He is sued by the twins who claimed he stole their idea and by the co-founder who was later squeezed out of the business. Oh, a bit of a spoiler there. We'll go mostly into spoilers at the end of the show. So what we'll
That's the
do,
interesting thing with films based on real events, though, isn't it?
yeah, I do think there are definitely spoilers in the film that would spoil the film
Oh
if you
yeah,
knew about it
absolutely.
beforehand. But because of the way that the narrative's structured, you sort of know about the lawsuits because that happens quite early on, and it's a lot of it isn't done in flashbacks. It's really interesting the way that Sorkin sorts out his structure of the screenplay. But yeah, what we'll do is do a full review of the film. We'll talk about its like cultural impact and how it's aged, how it was received by the Academy, and then after that we're going to do a full 5 minutes or something or whatever, however long we want to talk about it. Spoilers section. So if you've seen the film, hang on for that at the end. But if you haven't, you can always switch off after that point. Before we get properly stuck into the review, I just want to thank everyone for clicking onto the show, giving us a try. So it's a new adventure, hopefully one that lasts a while. But if not, so be it. I'm just very grateful for everyone that's listening, and I really hope you enjoy it because this is a great film to get started with. So this film is widely considered a classic. What did you make of it, Jamie?
Terrible.
Oh no,
No,
I'd cut you off right now.
well, great first
Yeah,
episode.
okay.
No, obviously it's an absolutely fantastic film. And you talked about how it's aged, and we'll go into that more later. But I don't think this
Yeah,
film ever stopped being relevant. And the idea
no,
of criticizing Mark Zuckerberg was honestly just ahead of its time. And people have
yeah,
joked about it, but there's actually very real potential for a social network too, with everything
yeah,
that happened with the privacy trials. But obviously, when
yeah, yeah.
the film, which is largely dialogue based, and obviously thank Aaron
Heavy
Sorkin for
dialogue. Yeah,
that, it really hooks you in from the start. But as I
yeah.
watched the Mark Commode review of it,
Hmm.
do you want to talk about it? Do you want to talk about that in a second? But as he points
Yeah,
out, and I like to, so I'm not just plagiarizing. I want to bring it up, so I'm quoting him in saying this. You can tell just visually that it's a David Fincher film, but I'd also say in tone,
yes.
it's something not really addressed
Mm,
in that review. Like the tone, it's obviously like it's based on real events. It's very dramatic. There's a whole legal dispute at the core of it, but it's not a slog to get through. Like it's not depressing or
no.
miserable. It's honestly kind of fascinating watching these really selfish, bizarre people have this really privileged argument. Because the Winklevoss twins, which are, I guess, in traditional structure, they're the closest thing to a villain.
Yeah, that's the
They're
interesting
no
thing
better
about the
or
film
worse than Mark
is that
Zuckerberg.
that's the problem. Everyone's as bad as each other, and these are sort of like unnatural film characters, aren't they? Because it's sort of in a way that's what makes it like a different kind of screenplay to and makes it stand out from the rest. Is that these characters would not exist in your standard narrative film because there's no hero, there's no villain, there's just lots of things going on all at once. And you're talking about sort of like how it's aged and sort of like
Yeah,
you're saying about how Zuckerberg is portrayed. I mean, I watched this film first around, I think it was like 2013. And at that point, Zuckerberg isn't the person that we know today.
no,
Um, I felt quite sorry for him first time around watching it.
very
This is obviously
socially
a very
awkward guy.
intelligent man. Yeah, he's someone that struggles in social situations. You can feel sorry for him at parts in the film. I think he plays completely different on a rewatch,
Oh
especially
yeah,
now
just
you know
complete
everything
out of
about him.
context.
You can easily view him as the hero, and you can easily
Well,
view him as the villain, and that's the same with the Winklevoss twins. I don't think it's the same place with Eduardo Saverin. I think Eduardo Saverin always
yeah,
comes off
so
quite
great
well,
performance by
regardless of how
Andrew
you feel
Garfield,
about
by
him.
the way.
Andrew Garfield, yeah,
Sort of a
yeah, I think
launch
it's
for
Andrew
him,
Garfield's best performance.
a peak
Yeah,
even. But the problem with these
yeah,
based on real
yeah,
life films is they're sort of like you were saying that they try and fit people into a structure, into that traditional screenplay structure. Like just look at something like
yeah, especially in the
Greatest
natural
Showman
biopics.
that takes like P.T.
Yeah.
Barnum and makes him into a traditional like fantasy musical hero, and it's
It's one of two things, though, isn't it? It's usually it's either the screenwriter's perspective and the director's perspective of who
yeah,
they were, or it's a character viewing a usually like a composite character perspective of your main character. So an example you'd use is something like The Last King of Scotland, right? Where you view Idi Amin through James McAvoy's character. You don't really see him outside
no,
of James McAvoy's point of view. You get your perspective through how Idi Amin made McAvoy's character feel. And this is I think the issue sort of like with understanding Zuckerberg in the way that he's portrayed by Jesse Eisenberg in the film is that um, you only really see him through Eduardo Saverin's perspective. Everything else is you just get this really blank point of view. You sort of get it at the start. I think the beginning is very important. That opening scene with Jesse Eisenberg and Rooney Mara, where you have this incredible dialogue, like 6-7 minutes
yeah,
of just battering each other, sort of thing, the pace of the dialogue in this really murky scene, where
The
you don't really
breaking up,
know
yeah.
what's going on and stuff. Yeah. And that becomes sort of a trigger point. And I think like this is what Fincher does well with the film is that, and this is especially apparent on a rewatch, is that this is very much his perspective of what's the incentive behind the creation of Facebook. And the version that he's gone with here is this idea of trying to get the girl, isn't it? It's this case of
It's like
this guy being socially awkward, being left out of everything, and having these sort of like, oh, if I do this, then this motivate me later on down the line, and they'll be impressed by me, and I'll get into the clubs and stuff. That was sort of the main trigger point, and I think it's really interesting the scene with Justin Timberlake's character in the nightclub, where all Mark Zuckerberg is fixated on is Sean Parker, played by Justin Timberlake, saying, "I created Napster for this girl in college," and so, "Oh, do you still? Where's the girl now? Who is she?" So I don't know. I don't care. Thing, and you can tell that's all he was interested about. Was like, what was the motive behind it?
It's like Sorkin presents like a really petty view of Zuckerberg. Like he's very childish, and it's this really socially awkward guy who wants to connect all these people, and he wants to be responsible for this great app that takes off. And poor Eduardo Saverin just loses his purpose for being there. They don't need him anymore, especially when Justin Timberlake's character comes into the picture. And most of the film is framed through the lawsuit without actually going into specifics. So I think that presents a very biased view of him, because he's like we're only seeing him in what's being dictated to be these key events. Yeah. So we're only seeing, it's like we only get to see him at his most petty, because we're seeing the things he did wrong. It's this whole spiral of things going bad.
Yeah. But then again, I feel like you see with Zuckerberg, you get the impression that he's different straight away. And it gets to a point where you feel like, okay, even if he did steal the idea, does it really matter? Because he's still built the website, he's still made it as successful as he has. He's still obviously more capable, as he says in the film, I was capable of doing something that no one else in this room, especially your clients, was able to do. If they were doing ads for Facebook, they would have invented Facebook. There are very strong hints about it being a stolen idea, and I feel like I don't really think it matters though too much about whether you actually think it's stolen or not in terms of the general scheme of things, especially knowing where Facebook is now.
Yeah,
in terms of, especially with the settlement stuff, where you sort of feel like, as Rashida Jones's character says towards the end of the film, and stuff like. Actually, I won't talk about that now. I'll talk about that in the spoilers. So,
in 2010, oh man, this film is so ahead of its time. In 2010, they had no idea of the absolute giant that Facebook would become. And this whole idea was the idea.
Well, it was massive then.
Yeah.
This was 2009, and they knew how big it was then. It's a different scale now.
I mean, what did the poster say? You can't get to 50 million friends?
500
million friends without making a few enemies. I think that's completely dwarfed now, but it's this idea of they want Zuckerberg to be almost sympathetic, but kind of neutral, as if you're reading over the transcripts of the hearing, which is appropriate because Sorkin actually used transcripts from the hearing for the interactions in the scenes, and composited them and changed them where necessary, but you still get this really natural sense of dialogue. And I like what you said about, does it even matter if the ideas were stolen? Because at this point, and even at that point, Facebook was just its own beast, and everyone knew who Mark Zuckerberg was, and it's not like he didn't put any work into creating Facebook.
No.
But, if he did something, that doesn't mean he should be free of consequences. He just
it's sort of like a parable where I'd use as an example with sort of like the Lance Armstrong drug scandal, right? So obviously he did cheat because he took performance enhancing drugs, but so did everyone else. best of them by a mile. He was still an incredibly talented cyclist. He still managed to beat everyone else, but he cheated. And it's the same place with here. He just cheated better than everyone else in cheating the system, Zuckerberg. But I think what you get
I would disagree
really,
with you on that comparison, just because I think I don't
I know
know.
it's off topic,
I know
but
you're not
that was
trying to justify
just an
what
example.
you're not trying to justify what
No,
Lance Armstrong did, but I don't
but you
want
can't.
to
Again, you can't really
actually
justify what
no.
Zuckerberg does either. Especially
It's
what he
sort of
does
like
now.
I
What he
get
does
what you're
now.
saying. It's like the
Yeah,
ruthlessness to it.
yeah,
Like what you said about who cheated better, like really stuck with me. And I was like,
yeah.
yeah, that's a good point because he had the business savvy to come out on
Yeah.
top. And do you think why do you think Fincher decided to do this film? Like, how does it fit in with the rest of his
This is the
filmography,
thing.
which at this point,
Yeah,
was discounting Alien 3.
yeah.
It was Fight Club,
I think it's very similar to Zodiac
Seven.
in terms of
Yeah,
the aesthetics, especially. But
and the True
yeah, and
Sorrow.
that it's basically the drama dictates the. They call it like, and they've said this with Sorkin in terms of The West Wing, especially, where drama's created through words. It's action through words, isn't it? The
Yeah,
words dictate
absolutely.
how the film moves, how it's paced. So actually, I don't think the editing is as brilliant as you would first consider it. It's all about how the words affect everything, and I feel like it gets the best out of its actors. Because on paper, this film should not work, not at all. In terms of it was considered the Facebook film when it was in production and stuff. And you look at this cast, and these were not established names at the time. There is not a single actor on this list who was considered either a household name or considered a great actor. Jesse Eisenberg was straight off doing Zombieland and Adventureland before doing this. But what they did, and what's important about his performance, is that it's nothing like Zuckerberg. It is nothing like him. If you've heard Mark Zuckerberg speak, he does not speak like Jesse Eisenberg. He doesn't speak quickly.
So it's not a impression which
No,
kind of
but
helps
it's a
it.
very strong performance in the film because it works for the scripted character rather than the person that they're playing. And I feel like that.
Oh, it won Best Film
Yeah,
Editing. I was wondering why you picked up on that.
yeah,
That's
because I didn't
interesting.
think that was
So
that
what were you
impressive.
saying?
But what I wanted to get back to of Eisenberg was that the way that he's handled in this film is really brilliant from Fincher. I saw this bit of trivia that they're saying about how Jesse Eisenberg had, because he has OCD, he really struggled with sort of in the making of the film trying to stop himself from acting in the way he was forced to act in a way that he'd always worked in his life to not do, so not speak really quickly or shut people off or stuff like that. And he was forced to do this in this film. And I feel like they really take advantage of his little ticks and the way that he speaks into evolving this kind of character. I feel like his characterization is absolutely brilliant because he doesn't lose himself. It's a subtle performance, but also a showy performance. It's
I
showy
can
in his
imagine.
subtleties because there's not much to him on the outside, but there's a lot in
I
the
think of
inside.
Zuckerberg as a much more, even more awkward and much more calculating, slower speaker. But of course, when you're trying to cram that much script, and Fincher doesn't want to cut any of it, and you're cutting it into this, you're cramming it into this film. It's where you get this need for this really fast-paced dialogue, which really works to the film's credit because you never get
No,
bored,
and
and you never lose
I think a
interest.
way that it does that though also is the way that it changes focus on character, which again isn't something that you particularly remember unless you go and watch it back. The first hour or so is all Eisenberg. Like he dominates the film. He is brilliant in that first hour, especially. He sort of takes a back seat as soon as Justin Timberlake gets introduced. Justin Timberlake as Sean Parker is a really good performance because he is the worst guy out of all of them in the film. He is just
Absolutely,
the
yeah,
worst guy,
absolutely.
and he works as like a contrast to Eduardo Saverin. They don't really interact that much. When they do, it's like pure fire because of the way that he's sort of taken over that role the wingman of the guy trying to make the money and everything like that.
Such a fake
And
Silicon Valley
yeah,
obnoxious guy, and getting such a big name who's not really established in
it
acting, but he's just
works.
so famous to play him. It's just
It's
brilliant.
perfection, right? And the scene at the dinner table where Sean Parker comes in, he's 25 minutes late and everything, and Timberlake just dominates. He's like, I've arrived, and he just takes control of that scene. And you see like Eisenberg in the background, like, oh, okay, we'll take a back seat here. It's all about Timberlake. But then from that point, Andrew Garfield's performance from that point to the end of the film is exceptional. It is exceptional. And I was thinking before, and I was like, well, I was watching it, it's like, oh, Andrew Garfield's performance really isn't as great as I thought it was. And then like, no, he just blows it away. The scene with his girlfriend where she sets fire to the scarf, I just think is brilliant in terms of where you really get an idea of where his head's at, in terms of he's just come back from LA back to New York, and he knows he's got to go out there again and make that commitment. He's just cancelled the card. It's sort of like he's stuck in so many different ways, in so different mindsets, because he wants to get out, but he knows how much money's at stake here and how big it is and how important it is for his career and everything. It's sort of like it's brilliantly structured, the way that those character dynamics work. It's all down to Sorkin. He's just a genius.
Oh yeah,
Sorkin's
absolutely.
a genius.
Great understanding of characters, and just obviously these guys are gonna conflict on a massive level. It's just I can imagine Sorkin when he sat down to write this, and the amount of opportunity for conflict between these characters. It just drives itself so much.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the accolades?
Yeah.
The Social Network.
Yeah. I don't like. It was famous. So the nominations it received were Best Picture for Dana Brunetti, Sean Chaplin. Sorry, I've pronounced that wrong. No,
Sorry.
Michael DeLuca and Scott Rudin. Best Director for David Fincher. Best Adapted Screenplay for Aaron Sorkin. Best Actor for Jesse Eisenberg. Best Cinematography for Jeff Cronenworth. Best Film Editing for Angus Wall and Kirk Baxter. Best Original Score for Trent Reznor.
And Atticus Ross. There they are again.
The absolute goats. And Best Sound Mixing for Ren Kleiss, David Parker, Michael Semenick, and Mark Weingarten. And it ended up winning three Academy Awards: Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Film Editing, and Best Visual Score. It's one of those ones where it's just gone over 10 years since this ceremony. And It's one of those ones where it's widely considered that if they were voting on it now, it would win Best Picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think, especially post The Crown, the winner that year, The King's Speech, hasn't aged well.
That's it. I was trying to think without having to look it up off the top of my head.
Yeah. Because of how good The Crown is and how sort of like entertainment value there is out of the royal family at that time, it comes to a point where it just doesn't play as well. I do like The King's Speech. I think it's a good film, but it's not to this level. But it is.
Do you mind if I read?
It is a more typical Best Picture winner. Sorry, go ahead.
Do you mind if I read out the nominees for that?
Yeah, of course.
So the winner was King's Speech, of course. Then it was 127 Hours, Black Swan, The Fighter, Inception, The Kids Are All Right, Social Network, Toy Story 3. You don't see the animated nomination very often. True Grit, and Winter's Bone, which is Katniss Everdeen before she was Katniss Everdeen.
It's a very strong lineup, very diverse lineup as well. So I would have been happy with a couple of those films winning, to be honest.
10 nominees.
Yeah, this was back in the day when they were trying to go for more, use the Best Picture nominees as sort of like as a reflective.
A real summary of the year.
Yeah,
all these
and that's sort of like what I'm trying to get at with this show in general, in terms of like, do these films belong in as one of the best of the year? And I think the definitive answer for this film is definitely yes. I think it's the film that's aged the best in general, because it aged in a way where it's more important now than it was back then. Because even though it doesn't address stuff like privacy issues and data, because it doesn't really talk about money at all. Like you see in the film,
No.
Mark Zuckerberg's very anti monetizing the film for a long time, and that creates the tension between him and Andrew Garfield's character. Is the idea of Eduardo Saverin wants to make money, but Zuckerberg doesn't from the film. So it's a very different perspective to what we have now.
How do you think having all these nominees and the diversity of the nominees affects voting? Do you think that steals votes from anyone?
What you need to bear in mind, right, and this is why I think it won Best Picture, it's all about hype, it's all about buzz. And
Yeah.
the thing is with The King's Speech, early 2011, which was the height of voting for the final voting for the actual winners, it was popping off. It was massive. It was the high. I think it was the highest grossing British film at the time. I think it's since been taken by the two In-Betweeners films and Skyfall. But at the time, it was the highest grossing British film of all time. And it was doing ridiculous box office numbers. And Colin Firth was steaming away with Best Actor. So by that point... But the thing is, even if you look at BAFTA, though, the Best Director still went to David Fincher.
Yeah.
That's what I don't get.
Winning Best Director is normally such a good
sign.
For
me, that's aged worse. Fincher losing director to Tom Hooper more than it losing Best Picture. Because you can sort of understand with Best Picture, say, okay, it was a film that at the time was something that the Academy loved. It was right up their alley. It's the kind of film that they've gone for before. While the Social Network, in all due respect, I think it was released in the summer, wasn't it?
Hooper won Best Director and then King's Speech won.
October in the UK, but it was obviously released earlier in the US.
I got a bit confused then. I thought you said, because I wasn't looking at the list, I thought you said Fincher did win. I was like,
he's famously never won anything.
Oh, yeah.
He's nominated this year for Mank, which I would be
very... He's not going to win, no.
I would be very disappointed if that's his career win, because that is not a good film.
Although the Academy loves to do that. They love to give out the career wins.
I think it's going to be...
win the BAFTA.
Exactly. That's what makes no sense. So Fincher can... That's what I was talking about, right? How can a very British film like The King's Speech, which absolutely swept at BAFTA, it did brilliantly, not win Best Director that the Academy does? It's baffling, really. It's something that really hasn't aged well, and this comes into this argument that sort of forms the basis of what this show is about. I think it was Seth Rogen who brought it up, saying that the Oscars should be voted 5 or 10 years later after something's been so you actually know if something's the best or not. Has it aged well?
Measure impact.
Yeah. Exactly. And I feel like The Social Network has made such a big impact on the way that we perceive these kinds of films, even on sort of like on TV as well. Like Silicon Valley is one of the best comedy series of recent times, and that has so much to do with that. The success of that, I think, has so much to do with The Social Network because of the way that it's scripted and the comparables between Thomas Middleditch's character in Silicon Valley and Jesse Eisenberg's character in Social Network. They're very, very similar sort of like ways that they're portrayed. Very similar protagonists. And also in films like Steve Jobs as well, you can very much see the influence of The Social Network, because it's all about this idea of how do you create a company, what's the motivation behind it, the people that will try to stop you or try and stand in your way or don't want you to be successful, things like that. That's why it's influential for me.
Ashton Kutcher version?
No, that's the Danny Boyle film with Michael Fassbender.
Yeah.
I haven't watched the Ashton Kutcher one. I
Why
don't
would you want? No one did.
But
terrible.
But the Danny Boyle one is very good and very, very interesting. I think that's a Sorkin screenplay as well, actually, come to think of it. I reckon that's probably Sorkin's best ever second best screenplay after Social Network. It's very close between the two. I feel like Steve Jobs is one of the best scripted films I've seen. It is phenomenal.
When did Steve Jobs come out?
2015. I do think Michael Fassbender should have won Best Actor that year, but we're not reviewing that now, and we won't review it ever because it wasn't nominated for Best Picture. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up.
I was
But
just going to say, do you feel like the success of this? Well, you said it influenced the creation of the Steve Jobs film, but do you think that landed Sorkin in the role of screenwriter as well?
potentially, yeah.
Because
Um,
I was thinking Steve Jobs. That's just how much can happen in 6 years. I thought Steve Jobs was much earlier. I was thinking like 2012,
oh,
2013. I
2016, isn't
think
it? Yeah.
did he get hired off the back
Well,
of
potentially, but I think Sorkin's a very unique screenwriter, um, in the sense that he's the best at the idea of walk and talk. So basically, where action is created through dialogue. Um, and The West Wing sort of introduced this idea of walk and talk in terms of the way that the characters speak while walking. Basically,
it's
it's as it sounds.
lovingly parodied for that fact.
Yeah, but it's influential.
Yeah,
Um, but you've seen films like now that Sorkin's moved into directing, into Molly's Game, which is a really really good film. I recommend people checking that out. And this year's Trial of Chicago 7. Those are two really interesting films about very interesting kind of characters. Well, Molly's Game is more of a character study, and Chicago 7 is again like Social Network, a biographical film, but not a biopic, but more portraying a moment in history. And I feel like that's what the Social Network does in general. And this is something that I didn't really remember from my original watch of it, is that it's very atmospheric. It's all about portraying a specific period in time, a specific location in time. So in this case, Harvard University, and a real commentary on how that that world existed at that time.
oh, man, it's almost nostalgic
It
in a way.
was, yeah, because it was the changing time of technology, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Where everyone suddenly started having laptops, and you suddenly see like mobile phones appearing in the film as it goes on, sort of
when was
thing,
the
stuff like
iPhone?
that.
2007, I think.
What was that? Sorry.
The iPhone 2007.
Yeah,
Yeah. So wow, early 2000s was a different time.
yeah, yeah. So, is there anything else you want to
Ah,
add before we move on
I
to
was thinking on that
spoilers?
point, like how they couldn't have known in 2010. I mean, like the change had already
Well, it was made in
started.
2009. It was
Made in
released in
2009, but
2010. Yeah,
they couldn't have known just how much the absolute growth of technology
yeah,
would. But it doesn't date the film, even
no,
though it's sort of nostalgic. It's a time capsule without dating the film. Like no one's
yeah,
gonna watch this and think it's dated, like a film from the 90s with those massive brick mobile phones would be.
yeah, yeah,
And that's just
yeah.
like
Absolutely.
the fantastic balance of it.
Because it works as a time capsule. It's because it's still looking backwards. It makes it not get dated.
Yeah,
And it was portraying an event as like happening any time, like most recent day, like 2008 or 2009 or something, then that would date it. But because it works in flashbacks, I think it gets away with it. Um, a final point actually what I wanted to make was there's obviously these ideas about sequel that you brought up earlier. Um, I want to. My argument would be I don't think they should make a sequel. First of all, I feel like this film is a near perfect film, and you don't want anything trying to get in the way of its reputation over time.
yeah.
Which I feel like if it's poorly handled and you don't get Fincher on board and you don't get Sorkin on board and
Oh, well, you wouldn't do
if
it.
there isn't a good original source, then there's no point. But also, like, I think what works so well is the youthfulness of its cast. You don't really see any characters that are that much older. They're all somewhat immature. They don't really know what they're doing. The whole idea of the book that it's based on is a book called The Accidental Billionaires. These aren't guys that are intending to make billions of dollars. It's not like they're living in Silicon Valley and they're starting a startup or anything. This is like stumbled upon, and the youthfulness of the looks of the characters and the way that they dress and things like that, I think, is so important to the narrative, and the way that you see these characters that I think if they're all fully grown adults, you sort of like you take them, they would be taking the mick a bit because they shouldn't be this naive for very smart people. There's
You,
all
you
these
think,
things about there's the influence of lawyers and stuff like that, so people can never really say what they're actually thinking. You interact differently at different ages, and I feel like that also plays a part into terms of the way that it appeals to a primary audience. So a very specific demographic will this film will definitely appeal to more than others.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I think if you're watching, you know, 30s, 40s Mark Zuckerberg trying to weasel his way
Shouting
out
each
of,
other, yeah.
yeah, that would just
Shouting at two army hammers, it doesn't really work, does it?
and Jesse, I don't know if Jesse Eisenberg has would be able to get the goodwill of people finding him sympathetic. If we were to see his version of
No.
Zuckerberg now, I don't think that would really
It will be
work.
very different.
Yeah, it'd be a different
I
tone.
think, I think the whole point is that it's all about his naivety in these situations. Like he's like that scene towards beginning of the film where they talk about Face Mash, the creation of Face Mash, and he's sort of like, well, I think I deserve recognition from this board, rather than realizing the repercussions of his actions.
Do you want to talk about spoilers?
And I was just about to bring up a point that I think will be considered a spoiler. So, if you haven't seen the film and you've sat through all this, thank you very much for listening. I think we'll leave it there for non-spoiler version. So if you don't want to hear spoilers, turn off now. Thank you very much for listening. And if you do want to hear spoilers, we're gonna start that now. Okay, let's move on to spoilers. What I was going to say was, it was about the way that Sorkin looks at dealing with like the lawsuits and things, how he wraps everything up. It's not done in your natural dramatic way. In your normal like law-based dramas or dramas based around specific events or lawsuits, it's all about the decision. So it's like creating People versus OJ, but leaving out the final episode.
Well, that's the comparison I wanted
that's
to
what he
make
does.
to Zodiac, and that they didn't have a resolution for Zodiac because it was never
It's true, yeah.
For The Social Network.
No, but it's sort of
it was
because you know who the killer is.
Yeah, you have a
end.
pretty good idea, but they can't confirm anything. And it becomes more about the personal anguish of the people trying to uncover it. But for The Social Network, they have a resolution, but these people are still ongoing. The fallout from it, Facebook itself, is still ongoing. So it thankfully, to its own merit, it goes away from traditional film structure in a way. But I will say, the ending, which I've been wanting to talk about all episode, of the Zuckerberg, this lonely, socially awkward guy who's pushed everyone like normal away from him, just sitting there refreshing the Facebook friend request.
Yeah,
it's just one of the most sad and satisfying scenes in a film today. It's such a brilliant ending.
It fits into that idea of motivation, though, doesn't it? That it was all about looking good. It's all about being the one that's the hero and everything, and it's sort of like that scene with Rooney Mara where he spots her in that restaurant, and how he wasn't able to say what he wanted to say because she kept on going on at him, and then he goes back to Andrew Garfield and says about you did the right thing, you apologise, and he's just like, yeah, right, yeah, sort of thing, because he didn't get to say what he wanted to say. So
again, another benefit of being younger and naive characters, so they just make stupid mistakes like that.
Yeah, you don't realise what you have until it's gone, sort of situation. But also, it doesn't properly wrap up anything. Like, so ultimately leads with the climactic point being the scene with Andrew Garfield storming into the office building and slamming the laptop down. Yeah. I'm not coming back for 50%. I'm coming back for everything. But the issue with that comes from the fact that we already know this because there's a lawsuit going on. And it's sort of like it moves to trying to be more climactic point when with the Justin Timberlake scene with the cocaine. But by that point, it was almost about it was about decreasing in tension. And so when Sean Parker phones Zuckerberg from the police station, it's sort of like, oh, it doesn't really matter by that point.
Yeah, it's not really much of a comeuppance, is it?
And then the reveal about the settlement doesn't come till like the final scene where Rashida Jones's character just sort of like mentions it as an off comment. Oh, you do know they're going to settle, right? It sort of makes it feel like, oh, okay. But you sort of buy it because of how exciting the ride has been, and the way that the screenplay was structured all along. It doesn't really matter what the resolution is, as in the same extent that it doesn't really matter what you think of the characters. All the characters come off well. All the characters you see in this film, I think most of them are billionaires.
Well,
Eduardo
the
Saverin
reason
is worth $16 billion.
why they're going to
You can't really feel sorry for
is
him.
because they don't want to put Zuckerberg in front of a jury. Because I don't know where they get this impression from, but the thinking might be unsympathetic and won't come across good to a jury. And as we know from recent events, that's completely untrue.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is, of course, a smart move on their part. And it's just really, like you say, it's not really a climax of a film, is it? We're just saying, oh yeah, we're just going to settle because we don't want to put you in front of. You think you'll lose, or you think you have a pretty good chance of losing.
But that could have been a climactic scene in itself. But I think it's interesting that it's left out.
Yeah.
That it's just because the emphasis at the end becomes about, oh, these guys are just pathetic, rather than these guys being specifically angry monsters and stuff and going at each other's throats. There's still sympathy there between the people, especially with the narrative around Zuckerberg and Eduardo Saverin. Because it's sort of things like with the chicken story. Oh, Eduardo Saverin, Zuckerberg. He was trying to not make us say it and stuff, and things like that. You still feel sorry for their kind of relationship. You still believe it in a certain way.
Definitely still a sense of loss and consequences to it. But at the end of the day, he walks away a billionaire. And the story continues after the film ends, so it's sort of untraditional.
They all have sweet lives. No one's career's ended from any of these goings on, and that's sort of the point. There's sort of bitterness that you're left with at the end, sort of like, well, all these guys are bad guys, really, but they all make more money in a minute that any of you are going to make in your life.
Like I saw a news headline when I was doing a bit of research about the film that was like, Eduardo Saverin feels no ill will towards Mark Zuckerberg. I'm thinking, I guess at this point it probably doesn't. It feels quite final in the film because the film's got to have at least a little bit of closure, even if it's a negative one.
Yeah, I think that's what Sorkin does so well in terms of his screenplays. He does it in other films as well, a couple of which I don't want to mention because I know that you haven't seen yet.
Sorry, give examples.
So like Trial of Chicago 7 ends in a similar way.
Oh, interesting. I do really want to watch that. I've been looking forward to that for a while.
I didn't want to talk about it too much as a comparison. I won't go into too much detail about it, but the way he ends that film, I think, ends in a different kind of way because you're left with a completely different emotion about the central characters, but in a way that's atypical for a law-based film to go, a trial-based film to go, in the same way that he does with the Social Network.
Do you know who we haven't mentioned at all? Yeah.
Is there someone?
I've mentioned the characters. I didn't mention the actor, singular.
Oh,
Armie Hammer. Her too.
Armie Hammer.
We haven't mentioned his dual performance. I mentioned the Winklevoss twins, but I didn't mention his best role. He's a lot of people's best role. Film.
I do think it is his best performance.
It's something that makes it such a solid Fincher film as well, is that he gets these performances out of people that even now you wouldn't expect it. Like, we know, I think isn't Armie Hammer pretty much kicked out of Hollywood at this point? I remembered as I was talking that he's like gone anyway, so he's been cancelled. So that's very interesting. That do you think things like that, news updates like that, are a problem for films in the past? Like,
I think the only problematic thing here was when I saw Kevin Spacey's name
Yeah,
come up
yeah,
in
I
the
was
opening
looking at that
credits.
as well. I didn't even want to mention. I don't want to
Yeah,
go as far to mention that, and that's something we're gonna.
yeah. I think that's the only possible thing. But as an executive producer, it's just like, oh, he just spent a bit of money, didn't
I
he,
mean, there might be
on
films
getting the film made. It's not too
you'd
much.
have to completely avoid with this series just because of similar reasons.
Yeah.
Luckily, this is
Yeah, there's definitely things that have aged to the extent where they're certainly
yeah,
unwatchable.
that's the thing. I mean,
I feel like American Beauty is one of my favorite films of all time, but I feel like that film has aged worse than any other film ever
oh,
made. Genuinely, in terms of its topic and stuff,
so
and the actors involved, I genuinely it's unwatchable now because of how those things go. So to that extent, I don't think The Social Network comes across any
no,
worse now
no,
than it did at the time, which I feel like it's a film that I always consider to be way better than it should be, or has any right to be. I think that's partly to do with the dramatic license involved, which I never have a problem with. But I'm always a fan of dramatic license. If it
yeah, I
improves the
don't mind at
film
all.
and it isn't like there, this isn't character assassination or anything, or giving you false information. Ironic for Facebook, isn't it? But then so be it. And it makes a more entertaining film. And this film, for what could genuinely just have been like guys sitting around looking at laptops and shouting at each other, it makes for an incredible watch that is rewatchable. It is still interesting and exciting now. It tells you things that you need to know about, and it tells you it in a way where you're going to understand what's going on. I feel like that's massively important because there's so many films that are like tech based or law based, which are very difficult to understand. And here you get everything. You know what's going on all the time. You know who's in control, who isn't, who's got the shares, everything like that. You're just on it all the time. It's one of the best screenplays ever written. I think it's the best adapted screenplay ever
Yeah,
written, and it's absolutely genius. And if you haven't seen it already, well, if you listen to this far into the show, you have
well
seen it
deserved.
already. So go watch it again. If you haven't watched it, go and go and watch it. Watch it now.
Another
It's great.
person who got the start on this, Dakota Johnson of 50
Yeah,
Shades of Grey fame, was
yeah.
had a bit part in this. While it's a real star making film, Joseph.
Yeah, definitely. For a film that didn't have many stars when it was first released, that's what I think has helped it still be
Oh
relevant
yeah,
now.
absolutely.
It's having those star names that make
I
people
was gonna
drawn to
say
it
that's
still.
what makes like the performances even more surprising. Like some of the film, like Andrew Garfield went on to do Spider-Man, so people looking back at this won't be expecting such a great performance from him. It's
Yeah,
what makes it
exactly.
such a perfect time capsule, as we've mentioned a couple of times during the show.
Yeah. All right. I think we'll leave it there for this for today's episode. Thank you very much for coming
Oh,
on.
yeah, thank you very much for hosting.
Uh,
Really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's not a problem. It's something that I really enjoy doing as well. I want to start doing it more. I hope to get some more guests on in the coming weeks, talk about some different kinds of films. The worlds are oyster in terms of
I
this.
was
We can
going to
do
ask,
anything,
with the
watch anything
whole
we want.
history of the academy in front of you, Joseph. What are you wanting to talk about next?
I do want to do this year's. I want to do some of this year's because there's some interesting films nominated this year. Once people get around to seeing them, that will be a good opportunity to do so. There's some films that I really like that have been released this year, obviously with the distribution and stuff in this country being a shambles, it's very difficult to do that. But some new ones, some old ones, some famous winners, some famous close runners up, stuff like that. Things that have aged better than others. I want to do it
Yeah,
all. So hit follow on Spotify or wherever you watch these, and listen to these, and you'll get notified when these get uploaded. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you stick around for the next episode, and thank you very much for listening. And that will do us.